touchdown. It's through 50. He's got the speed. Touchdown.
Welcome into the latest episode of Mac and Mose. Andy McNamara, joined by the editor-in-chief of GoDucks.com, Rob Mosley. We are here to wrap up Oregon's game against Utah. The number 13 Ducks fell in crazy fashion, I guess you could say, to the Utes. It was a game reminiscent, I think, a little bit of 2 years ago against Arizona. Jeff Locke mentioned that after practice today. A game that just, it got away from Oregon, and then it just snowballed from there.
Yeah, the third quarter, it's 28-0 Utes in that quarter, and there's, the fake punt that they run for after the punt hits the wire holding the camera. There's the fake punt return, which is just brilliantly executed. You think it's 1 in a million, and then the Seahawks go and do the same thing the next day. It went from like very disheartening and disappointing to watch to just sort of surreal and like, all right, hey, let's. If I was playing this on Xbox, I would have thrown the controller against the wall, hit the reset button, and stormed out, gone about my day doing something else. But you just got to sort of sit there and wear it for the last quarter, and just get ready to move on to the Colorado game next week.
Yeah, it was kind of surreal in Autzen Stadium, where the game was decided really by the end of the third quarter. Shout comes on. Normally that's kind of a pick-me-up if it's a tight game or if Oregon's behind. In this one, credit to the student section because they still were into it.
That was like everybody's cue to leave. It's like, all right, they stuck around for Shout, and then the fourth quarter, Autzen looked like the stories I always hear from what the stadium looked like for games in the 70s and 80s, and I don't fault anybody at that point. There's a better use of your time at that point. I mean, valuable reps, frankly, for a lot of, and not to put a silver lining on this, but a lot of guys got to get into that game and get some reps, which is a good thing, but you'd certainly like it to be under much different circumstances.
Yeah, I'm a glass half full person, and I was struggling after this one to come up with anything. But, in hindsight, looking back at it, I haven't watched the whole game again, but the first half, there were chances, and there was opportunity there for Oregon to make a game out of this. The start offensively, Vernon Adams never got in any sort of rhythm. I don't know if it was physical. I really don't know exactly what was going on with him. Scott Frost talked about it a little bit after Monday's practice, how, he watched Vernon warm up, and by watching him, he was convinced that he could go. But after a couple of series, it was fairly evident that he was having some difficulty pulling the trigger and throwing downfield. And the last pass that he attempted was a real short one that came up. Braylon Addison was open in the middle of the field and just couldn't get it there. Yep. So, that added some issues, obviously. You bring in a quarterback mid-game in Jeff Locke. He immediately takes the team down the field, gets within a touchdown, and unfortunately just unable to sustain that momentum, and a lot of that is because of the way Utah played.
Yeah, just some third down conversions. I thought the defense actually was kind of trying to take the lead early on. The offense scored to tie it back up at 6-6, and the defense I thought had been playing well at that point. DeForest Buckner was really standing out. I thought Tyson Coleman had played a great game early on, first quarter. Kept the Ducks in it, kept them close while the offense was clearly struggling. Vernon was clearly struggling, whether it was, protections, actually throwing the ball, all of that. I mean, he didn't seem comfortable, but the defense was playing up those first few series. And then it's 6-6, and Utah mounts a drive where they convert 3 third downs. And here's where it's a game of inches. 2 of them they converted by 1 yard. It was like 3rd and 8, and they got 9, 3rd and 5, and they got 6. Between that, a third down conversion on an Oregon defensive holding penalty. And just Ducks couldn't get themselves off the field. Utah scores. And then again, the situation you're talking about, Locke comes in, looks great. The crowd's chanting his name. It's like, here comes the Cinderella story. And I've said before, I think I love him as a guy, and root for him. I was like, all right, Jeff's, it's finally going to work out for Jeff. And then again, third down, Travis Wilson keeps the ball on a zone read, goes 60 yards, sets up another touchdown, and from that point on, it just seemed like that's when the snowball really started rolling down the hill.
And I thought about this after the game. We almost take it for granted. I think fans certainly take it for granted all the times Oregon has put that kind of beating on an opponent. And now to sit here and you're like, okay, well, that's what that feels like. It is. It just the game, the momentum in college football, when you're able to play from the lead with tempo like Oregon likes to do offensively, it can, it obviously has been a very successful recipe in the past. Utah, while maybe not with the same tempo, using the zone read.
Yeah.
Wilson was healthy first time he's been healthy facing Oregon. He probably played his best game of his life, certainly of his college career, and you have to give him some credit on that. There was that play, though, that you mentioned, the defensive holding, and I'm not bringing this up to single out an individual player. Jawan Williams was called, and it was a situation where it ended up prolonging a drive for the go-ahead touchdown at that time. But on the play, Oregon got great pressure on Wilson, and he basically was backpedaling and just chucked it downfield. It probably was an uncatchable ball, regardless of the holding.
But holding doesn't matter. Doesn't matter in that situation.
It doesn't matter, and he did grab the jersey, so it was the right call. I'm not disputing the fact that it was a penalty at all. But just that's one of those instances. It's a little bit unlucky, and it ends up being a huge play in the game. And when they're able to go up by multiple scores, Oregon didn't help itself by turning it over in the red zone in the third quarter. And then, as you mentioned, the special teams. We talked about it going into the game, how all three phases, Utah has some strength. I mean, they have Booker, they have a stout defense that's always nasty, and they have great special teams. Yeah. Well, Wilson also came to play in this one. Oregon actually did a fairly good job on Booker outside of his throwing a touchdown pass, but they contained him fairly well.
Yeah, but you saw on the zone read. I mean, I think they sold out. That was the 60-yard play. I mean, that was a 3rd and 1, I think.
Yeah.
And clearly they were like, hey, Booker's going to get it. You'd be an idiot not to give it to Booker. And so, it was a great counter. I mean, we just saw in so many ways Utah do to Oregon what the Ducks have done to people. And that, you get up on a team, they have to get out of what they want to do well. When the Ducks aren't equipped, this team's not equipped post Marcus Mariota to attack down the field quite as well as they did with Marcus. But what do they feel the need to do when you're down 2-3 touchdowns? Start throwing it down the field. You get a couple of interceptions out of that. By the same token, the zone read stuff Utah's running. There's a reason the Ducks have been doing that, because it's hard to defend. Mm-hmm. You isolate a defender, you try to convince him the ball is going one way, you go with it the other way, and you're going to have some room to run. It shouldn't have been that much by any means, but it's a lot of that stuff. We know now. You see why Oregon's been doing what they've doing. They've been so successful with it. So it's they took some of their own medicine for one night, and hopefully only one night. But obviously time will tell. I mean, this team's got a lot to prove. We talked, I think, going into last week's game, kind of who are these guys? We're still wondering who these guys are. They certainly didn't answer any of those questions last week, at least in the affirmative or in a positive sense. So as we move forward now, I'd like to see them turn around and get it back on track.
Well, we could continue to pick this scab and dig deep into this one, but
I'm sure I can find something I got to do. I got to go.
Before we wrap up, though, the encouraging thing I think is while the fans and a lot of us, I think, up in the press box are just dumbfounded sort of after this one takes place. You look at the team, you look at these guys out at practice on Monday, and they're a lot more resilient, I think.
To be young.
Yeah, and this is a team that I think is anxious to get back out there. They're anxious to bounce back. They bounced back after the Arizona game a couple years ago. Bounced back last year after a loss. It's no guarantee they'll do so again, but I think that they approach things the right way. The team certainly isn't pushing any panic buttons, whether that's coaches or players at this point. After practice today, Vernon Adams, Jeff Locke stepped up, answered every question that the media threw their way. I mean, we're really professional in how they went about their business, and Coach Elfrich has taken a lot of the blame on himself for this one. I don't know that that's necessarily warranted, but it's good to see a coach just sticking up for his guys, whether it's coaches or players.
Yeah, and Don Pelham taking the same tack that there were some assignment issues defensively in that game, but he knows that comes down to how the guys were coached, and it's got that falls to him to fix. So. I've never covered an Oregon loss where the spotlight didn't immediately go on the defense and whatever issues it had in that game. You've got an offense that only scored 2 touchdowns in 55 minutes, so certainly they've got a lot to address. And some of the special teams things Utah was able to do, obviously the Ducks have to clean that up too. So all 3 phases took their lumps here tonight. All 3 phases got a lot to fix this week.
Well, coming up, a chance to at least get back out there and go after it again. It's another Pac-12 game. It is at Colorado, and this game all of a sudden looks a lot more difficult than probably it did when the schedules were released in the offseason. And that's not just because Oregon is coming off a loss. Colorado's 4-0 on the year. They're so far much improved over the last couple of seasons. They're playing at home. It's a nationally televised game on ESPN. They're watching the Oregon film from the Utah game, going, "Hey, we got a shot in this one." So it's gonna be a big challenge, and I think everybody, certainly on the UO side of the ledger, is anxious to get out there and get it going. We will preview that. We'll be happy. We always are. Coming up later this week. So in the meantime, if you have anything, any decent questions or comments, PG-13 that you want to send to Rob?
They've run the gamut over the last 48 hours.
Feel free. I'm at McNamara UO. He is at Duck Football. Until next time, we'll see you.
Gets the corner into the end zone for the touchdown. It's through 50. He's got the speed. Touchdown.